I'm Laura Cross of Rebel Seed Films and Entertainment. I'm the writer and producer of the short action war drama Devil Dogs. And in this special podcast, I have a conversation with an actor from the film. Joining me as co-host on this episode is Lindsay Holt, director of Devil Dogs. And today we're talking with Michael Worth, who plays the photojournalist Riley in Devil Dogs. Michael is an actor, a writer, and a director. His first lead role came with the film Final Impact in 1992, for which Variety magazine deemed him a promising newcomer. Michael worked on a series of low-budget films before landing a part in the TV series Acapulco H.E.A.T in 1993, and was the second choice for the role of Robin in Batman Forever in 1995. Michael wrote and appeared in the psychological thriller western Duel in 2008, which won Best Independent Action Film. His second directorial work was the drama God's Ears in 2008. He's recently just completed directing on another 3 films, Broken Memories, Enchanting the Mortals, and Bring Me the Head of Lance Henriksen. Hey, Michael, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here.
Oh, well, I'm excited to be in podcast land.
Well, I can't wait to talk to you about Devil Dogs, which is a project that we worked on together and where we met you. But I'd like to go back a little ways and find out how you really broke into filmmaking and acting. I think it was back in the early 90s. I know from your bio that when you first came out to L.A., you were trying to save money and you were living with your dog in your truck for 6 months. And
good old days.
Yeah, good old days. So, tell us about that time period and how you broke in.
Well, I came from Northern California. I mean, I was born in Philadelphia, but I went to high school in Northern California, which is where my love of cinema started settling in through old horror movies and Godzilla films and samurai movies and the usual kid stuff. I went out and bought a couple Super 8 millimeter cameras and got together with my friends, started writing scripts, and just started making movies, and I bought a couple of books. I'm blanking on the titles at the time, but about the process of script writing and how to shoot, and I even went out and bought a cheap slate I got somewhere, even though we didn't really need to sync anything.
But you had to have it because that was part of the process.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. I had to be professional, Nobody was getting paid, But it was, I did films like The Tire and Dracula versus the Sea Monster and Disaster and Enter the Toad, and I just would make these films that would range from 5 minutes to 45 minutes. And so by the time I got out of high school and I graduated a year early, I shot right down to L.A. to try and make films. And as it sort of happened, the acting part was the sort of initiation for me. That was sort of how I segued into doing films, was via the acting. Even though at the time when I went down there, I was pretty much ready to be a writer, be a director, be an actor, be an editor, whatever it took just to start making movies.
So, I mean, you knew always that this was your path. I mean, you made The Tire when you were 10 years old, which is pretty amazing.
I still have it. I still got the roll of film. It's pretty. I'm not really. I was pretty impressed with with my work back then.
So you landed in L.A. and you wanted to do anything, and you kind of fell into the acting.
Yeah, actually, it was like one of those things out of a movie where I was walking on Venice Beach and some manager comes along and goes, "Hey, kid, are you an actor?" And, it was like, it started that way, and he started submitting me on jobs, and that's how it kind of, I started doing a bunch of extra work. I did extra work for years. In fact, that was that time where I was living in my truck. I'd go off and work as an extra, then come back and park somewhere nice in Santa Monica or Marina Del Rey and go to sleep and wake up and do it again the next day.
Amazing. And so you landed your first lead role in a film called Final Impact.
Right.
And Variety had some nice things to say about you.
Who did?
Variety.
Oh, Variety, yes. Yeah, that was kind of nice because it did get released in theaters, which is good because when you release films in theaters, they tend to get noticed for good or for bad, I guess. But that was a great experience for me. That was my real professional heads up into how a film is made from start to finish. So that kind of really got me going when I did that movie.
And so how did that compare from filmmaking? Were you making any films at that time, or you were just focusing on acting?
No, at that point I was still, just doing the audition circuit. I mean, I was writing my scripts, these scripts that were piling up on my shelf, hoping one day somebody would take a look and buy one. But at that point I was still just go out acting and doing guest star work, and Final Impact came along, and it was this company called PM Entertainment, and it was run by Joseph Murray and Rick Pepin. And they had, by the time they did finally, they'd only done a couple of films at that time, but they were like kind of very similar to Roger Corman sort of style, where they got together with a group of guys and just started looking what genre was selling and went out and tried to make a couple of films. And they did really well for themselves, and if you look them up, you'll see they had this sort of one movie a month thing they worked into, where every month they'd make another movie and make another movie, and they were making really inexpensively and shooting, and eventually kind of upgraded their offices and had their own sound stage and were shooting movies on their sound stage on location. But they just were really smart about sort of putting in just enough to get the film made and to sort of hit that genre quotation of whatever they were trying to do, and they made a long stretch of it. And I did like their first, I was in their first. I did 3 films for them, and it was in their kind of their first couple of years of doing movies. So it was nice to watch them start and grow and their process. And again, I would. Even though I was acting and performing in these films, I would always sit back and ask questions, and how do you get this way, and what about distribution, and that kind of thing.
So then what catapulted you into your first feature that you directed?
That, well, I think it was around 2002. I was kind of getting into this place where the creativity bug that was in me was getting frustrating just venting it through acting. There's something very... very physical about acting, something very emotional about it, and I think I felt there was another part, sort of more, I don't want to say more brain-oriented, but just something that was kind of missing from that I guess sometimes I call it a disease, because it feels that way. It's like you can't shake it if you want to. And so I actually stepped away from my agents, my manager, said, listen, if I keep devoting all these hours every single day to auditions and going in and because it's like one audition, you think, oh well, it's in a half hour or something. It's like it's not. It ends up being like sometimes an entire day. You're prepping for hours at a time. You're memorizing lines. You're getting your clothes set. You've got to drive to the audition. You got to do the audition. So there's a lot of time involvement when you're doing these auditions. And I thought I would almost rather take that same amount of time, try and take some of these scripts I've got sitting on my shelf that I've been working on since I was, 16, 17 years old, see if there's anything any good, and then go out and meet with people and try and raise money to do the films. And that's exactly what I did. I had a idea for a hybrid Western martial arts thing that I was putting together called Ghost Rock. And I met a guy named Dustin Reichert who had done one film, and he'd actually used me as an actor in it. And he said, look, I really want to try and go out and make another movie. And I said, well, let's go. So we literally, the two of us, with this half-assed script I had written, gone to doctors' offices and car dealerships. And I mean, we went up and put up like these chalkboard like demonstrations of how a movie is made and how it makes money, and half the time we didn't even know what we were talking about, but we would travel to San Diego or Corona and just try and raise $5,000 here, $3,000 there, $20,000 there, and ultimately we pulled together what was I think it amounted to about $300,000 to $350,000, something like that. And
well, that's
we had
our
money to make this movie, which ended up being an insane experience that I look back on now and think I don't even know how I did it. Again, I wasn't directing it. He ended up being the director. I ended up starring in it with Gary Busey and Jeff Fahey and Adrienne Barbeau and.
Oh wow, you got some names in there.
Yeah, well, that was kind of the part of it. It's sort of we had to agree to pull a couple of names in, and I had, as an actor myself, I had some relationships with some of these actors, so it was sort of like I could make some phone calls and say, hey, please come out and do this for us for less than you normally make. I'd written at the time, again, since I had never done a film, myself as a producer, I really didn't know what I was doing. So I had written this epic, gigantic script that literally had a cast of about literally like 40 leading roles. I mean, there were so many people in this, and there was action scenes every 10 minutes, guns, horses. I mean, to look at that script today, I would be saying we need at least several $1 million to make this. But we went out there. We shot with 3 units. We shot it on 35-millimeter film. We were in old Tucson studios. We were out in Mescal. I mean, we were all over Arizona shooting this thing.
So just kind of guerrilla filmmaking, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it was, but I mean, surprisingly, it was a huge crew and cast. I mean, we literally 50 people, working on this film, and I still look back shocked. And truthfully, it was one of those things where, because we didn't know what we were doing, we were able to do it. Because if we had any more intelligence about making a film, there would have been no way we would have made that thing.
Well, it's so funny because Lindsay said that about us with Devil Dogs.
Yeah, so ignorance is bliss sometimes, because you look at it, you got Devil Dogs done, and you've got something that's really, really interesting, and you probably, if you thought about it too much or learned too much, you might have gotten scared away and not tried to do it.
Yeah. So what happened with Ghost Rock? Obviously, it was a good enough experience that you decided, hey, I want to direct now and write and finance the next thing I do.
Yeah, no, it was. It's exactly what it was, and I learned so much watching this film get put together, and I learned, the goods and the bad about it. I watched, it was the first time I had a script produced, so I got to watch this script kind of, there's 3 ways you make 3 times when you make a film. You do it in the writing stage, you do it in the filming stage, and you do it in the editing stage. And so I watched the idea of the paper script slowly becoming turned into the actual film script, which was different. And then when it started to be edited and changed by the producers and the director, I watched it become the new script. So you watch the stages of a film transforming into whatever it is it ends up. And some of it's great, and some of it's very, disillusioned. You become disillusioned with sort of the process. But it never was my interest dampened. So I set out and continued to make more films. And now I was learning about how to raise money, and I was learning about how to put things into production and who I needed on my crew. And I'd go into offices to try to pull films together and knew what I was talking about. And so literally, I was faking my way through it before. I'd go in and say, well, it's going to require X, Y, and Z, and I didn't even know what I was talking about.
So the second go-round you knew.
Yeah, at least a little more. I'm still learning. Obviously I learn something new every time, but at least I felt like when I was walking in, I knew how the process worked.
So what did you discover when you directed your first feature indie? Was that Killing Cupid in 2005?
Yeah, and Killing Cupid was a really interesting dynamic, because it was a guy that I went to who basically said, look, I'm going to give you $50,000. I want you to put Lorenzo Lamas in a movie, and I want you to shoot it in this month, and just make it about some assassins. So that was it. That was kind of like what I had to do. I had to go out and write a script, get it done within 30 days, put Lorenzo Lamas in it, and try my best to make something interesting. And he gave me a stack of 16 millimeter short ends. Short ends is basically what's left of some film stock somebody else has shot. So there's an extra, it's 100 feet or it's 200 feet or whatever, So I had these literally stacks and stacks of film cans that I had to go use. And that's what I did. That's how I made that movie. I went out and wrote this crazy script about a group of assassins that are all chasing this sort of mythical assassin named Cupid. And I put, Jeff Fahey in it again. I called Lorenzo Lamas up and, said, hey, man, we come work a couple days on this film, and shot it in Palmdale and Valencia and, everywhere.
Wow, that's a crazy movie experience.
It was, and it was definitely, again, I was learning a lot as I did it, because now I was sort of stepping behind the lens in a different way, and it was funny because we were like running out of short ends, and I started rewriting the film so I could shoot some of it on Super 8. It was like there was all these things I was doing to try to get it done, by having to resort to Plan B all the time, which originally I was going to make a production company until Brad Pitt stole it.
Oh, he stole the title,
I found you turn to Plan B so much, when you're doing a movie.
Or plan C or D, you know?
Yes, exactly.
You get really creative. Yeah, when one thing doesn't go the right way, you get really creative. And you garnered a Best Director nomination at the Action on Film Festival for that one, and
yes.
And you won Best Fiction Film, right?
Yeah, I think at that same film at festival. I think, I can't remember, but yeah.
Yeah, in your bio it says it was the Hollywood Fiction Film and Video Festival.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was a different festival. That's correct. Yeah, you're right.
So,
which is great, and it's because there's one thing about film festivals. It sort of helps you. What I love about film festivals is that, I mean, aside from the awards and somebody recognizing some work you've done, it's a great way to take your film out and have people you have absolutely no connection to watch your film instead of just taking it to your family's house and saying, "Hey, Mom, watch this," and tell me what you think. Because of course they're never going to tell you the truth anyway. So it's a great time film festivals are always great when you have movies like these little indie films to go out and have people take a look at them.
And you're a big martial arts aficionado, I should say.
Well, I've been doing martial arts since I was a little kid. I mean, I started training when I was 9, actually, and then I quit after about a year because it was almost too much, and then I came back to it when I was 12 or 13. Once I discovered Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan, and at that point, it became pretty much a daily part of my life ever since.
And so is that something that you try to put in most of your films, or you've made a lot of films that incorporate martial arts? Well,
it's kind of funny because I've always admired martial arts films. I love the idea of doing one, but I was one of those guys that had a lot of, martial arts experience that I wasn't trying to incorporate into my career, specifically because and this kind of returns back to the topic when I started switching over to getting behind the camera, because it kind of ties in with this, which is that I didn't want to end up being typecast into this idea that this is the karate guy, because I started doing a lot of work that way. Where when I did that first film, Final Impact, PMN signed me to do Street Crimes with Dennis Farina, which was another kickboxing movie, and then after that, To Be the Best, which was another kickboxing movie. Then I did Fists of Iron, which again was another kickboxing movie, and I started to go, okay, this is fun. I'm cutting my teeth. I'm new. I'm learning this, but I do not want to be this guy that suddenly when he gets into his 40s and 50s, that you're going, well, you don't look so right kicking people in the head anymore, and that's what you do, so see you later, And so I was becoming really cautious of that because I was here to be an actor and a filmmaker, and I didn't want to be the next, God bless them, I think they have great careers, but, another Van Damme or Seagal where that is what you think of them for, So when I got Final Impact, it was great, but I wasn't going out trying to find martial arts films to do. Mm-hmm. And so at one point, when I did a TV series called Acapulco H.E.A.T, and again I was playing Tommy Chase, the karate expert on the show, and it was that whole thing again about, all right, this is becoming my identity here, and this isn't. It's like if let's say Matt Damon's a great golf player, does he do a bunch of golf movies? It's and that's kind of what I was trying to be careful of. So when I turned away from the auditioning, part of that was for me to be able to start crafting my own projects that allowed me to not have to do martial arts. Now, initially when I did Ghost Rock and when I did Killing Cupid, the producers are like, no, we got to see you kick somebody in the head. So I was like, okay, well, I'll make Ghost Rock. I'll have a couple of martial arts characters in there because, we'll bring these, we'll bring that element up into the film. And Killing Cupid, all right, they're assassins, so we can throw a few kicks here and there. So I kind of had to use it somewhat to get these films made. But eventually, by the time I got to doing God's Ears, I had taken my big step away from that, and that's what I wanted to do.
So God's Ears, was that your second directorial feature? Yeah,
God's Ears I always kind of looked at as my first feature, but it is technically my second, only because when I did Killing Cupid, it was such an experiment. It wasn't almost like a film. It was almost like here's a bunch of weird pieces and put them together and try and make this puzzle look right. But by the time I did God's Ears, it was meant to be a straight up feature film that went out to the theaters, and at that point I had been working. I'd been working on at an office at doing ghostwriting for this company doing TV movies and features and stuff. And it was very genre oriented. All the stuff was for like Lifetime and the Sci-Fi Channel and that kind of thing. And I was really interested. I was getting so thrown into this, dilemma of having to do this structure with the script. You know, it's like in the first 15 minutes you got to have this happen. The second 15 minutes is got to, and it was so determined that way that I had to almost break away and say, I want to write a script that I don't have to follow any rules, any sort of routine that is, you know, has been placed on me this last, you know, year and a half while I've been working here as a writer. And that's how God's Ears came about. I just wanted to write this story. I don't want to think about Act 1 or Act 2 or Act 3. I just want to create a story that's more thematic maybe than narrative, and focused on relationships. And luckily I was halfway through the script, and I was talking to one of the producers, a guy named Steve Hayes, who was the producers on my TV series Acapulco H.E.A.T. He said, look, I got $100,000 lying around. I want to make a movie. What do you got? I said, well, I'm working on a script called, you know, God's Ears, about a guy that's got autism, and he wants to be a boxer, and he meets a dancer, and they start to fall in love, yet they're from two totally different worlds. And he goes, oh, say no more. I love it. Let's do it. You know, and then that's how that started.
Well, that's the easiest pitch I've ever heard.
Yeah.
So how was that experience for you and the final product, final film?
That movie actually changed everything for me, because I think it wasn't until we had wrapped the movie, which maybe I'll get to in a second, but I mean, even just the process of making it, if there's ever magic on a film set, if you can ever say that was the time that it happened. You know, I shot it in Berkeley, mostly Oakland, and then some of it in way northern California, and then a little bit here in L.A. So, I mean, in a 10-day period, we drove all across southern and northern California to get the film done. And just the right people got involved, and everybody was, you know, tapped into the story. It was a real tiny crew. I mean, we had probably maybe 8 people working on the crew, 8 or 9 people, and then, you know, a fairly small cast. And I remember I was, like, I think 3 days away from shooting the scene. I didn't have a guy that was supposed to be the boxing coach in the film, and I was trying to get a name to do it. Originally, I talked to Lance Henriksen about it, and he got wrapped up into another project, and he couldn't do it. So I ended up getting in touch with John Saxon, and I sent him the script, and I said, listen, I need somebody to play this part. It starts in 2 days. What do you think? And I sent him the script, and he called me later that night and said, I'll do it. So it was a real blessing to have him on board.
Yeah, amazing. So it was a beautiful process for you, and what happened with the release of it?
Well, so we finished the film, and and this was where I started to learn about self-distribution. You know, I mean, over the past 5 or so years, we've come so amazingly far in terms of how people are getting their film seen that you would have never, I mean, who would have, you know, 7, 8 years ago, who would have thought, yeah, there's going to be a giant percentage of filmgoers that are going to watch all their films on their cell phone. I mean, you just wouldn't have ever thought that was going to be the case, you know.
No.
But that's slowly becoming the case, and the platforms for your movie being seen via the internet, etc., it's just changed the foundation of filmmaking. And so I started to take the film around to film festivals, and I mean, learning film festivals is a whole other topic. But I remember getting into a couple of festivals and going, oh, this is going to be exciting. You know, we're going to win some awards, and this is, you know, you're being all pumped up about, like, you know, having a film that everybody is, you know, proud of or whatever. And I remember standing, and it was at, which festival? I think it was the Method Fest, in Calabasas. And the film ended, and it was a pretty packed house, and people were coming out. And I started looking at everybody walking out, and I saw tears just streaming out of people's eyes, or, you know, people wiping their eyes, and they're coming out and just taking deep breaths. And suddenly everybody was coming up to me and saying, thank God you made this movie. It's like, this is what's making making me feel I have a future with my son, or, you know, this is great for my nephew, or I know a neighbor, and I was standing there in awe. My jaw hit the floor, and I thought to myself, here I am thinking about awards and thinking about, you know, all the technical achievements and all that stuff, and I'm going, this medium can sometimes be such a powerful thing for people that literally walk away with, you know, I mean, I'm not trying to, you know, give this film more due than maybe it's worth, but I'm just saying the fact that it touched people's lives, that way just changed my whole approach to filmmaking now. I believe me, I'm the first person that loves a good samurai kung fu movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of thing. But I just started thinking, look, we've got a finite amount of time on this earth, and I really just started thinking about how much do I want to invest in films that actually mean something, or is it just go ahead just for the roller coaster ride of it? And I think since making that film, I've been pointing into a direction of making films that have much more meaning. I'm not talking about preachy. I'm not talking about sitting here saying, trying to make them, too brain oriented. Films are still sort of emotional experiences, but just to start thinking about how to possibly make films that are just better films and better for people.
Wow, you're sharing that really gives me a new perspective on you coming into Devil Dogs. Then, saying that you want to be a part of things that make a difference and are important, and that's where you want to devote your time to. So, we didn't audition you for Devil Dogs. I saw a reel and some of your work, and I just knew immediately that's our Riley, and we offered you the role, and I'm guessing that you must have read the script first before you said yes.
Right.
What was it that attracted you to the character of the photojournalist in this Riley?
I think what I liked about it, first off, is that the idea of war is such an potent topic that. And a lot of times most war films, particularly coming, obviously out of Hollywood, I think are sort of so agenda-driven that it's all about saying, we're going to make an issue about this. Now, I think we all, even if you're, for somebody going to a particular war, World War II, Vietnam, whatever your war is that you were saying, I think we should have gone and done that, pretty much everybody knows that war's terrible. It's not. It's an awful experience, but sometimes it's a necessary one. And I felt like the thing about Devil Dogs was it wasn't trying to be pretentious one way or another. It wasn't out going, rah, 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 and it wasn't going out going bad, bad, bad. It was saying, look, here's an experience, and look what it does to people in this experience. And it had different characters that were sort of experiencing the war slightly differently, and I liked that. Again, it wasn't, it's like there's this, I was coming in to play Riley, this photographer, who in a sense is sort of the eyes of the audience in a way, at least a connection with the people back home. And then you got these group of Marines he's thrown in with, and they all have their different sort of take on the experience they're in. And I just kind of, even though it's in a short format, there was so much being told in that space of time in that project, and I felt like without it being, let me jab you in the eye with my ideal of what I feel about war, it felt real to me. Reading that script, it felt like it was just an emotional experience, and I liked that a lot about it. That was very attractive to me about it. I didn't feel like it was not that it would have been propaganda one way or another, or that to that degree, but it really felt like something from the heart, again, which kind of ties back to the types of projects I've been doing lately. And that was why I was so connected to it.
Oh, that's great to hear that insight. And I always think of a script really as a blueprint, and it doesn't come to life until the actors bring it to life. What do you think that you brought to the role of Riley that wasn't on the page? I know you're a photographer yourself, and he's a photojournalist, so I'm assuming that's something that's similar to who you are, and you were able to bring that. What's your thoughts?
Well, that was always great too. It's always nice when there's a role or something that gets offered to you, and and it has some kind of direct tie to your life, because it's not like it sort of makes the acting less. It's not about like I'm having to substitute photography for some other interest, because I love looking through my lens. I love running around. I was taking photos today, as a matter of fact, and so I could completely relate to that idea of trying to use, even as a filmmaker, to capture something with this lens and translate it back to whatever your audience is. In the case of Riley, it was his news, his newspaper, his magazines, or whatever,
And I can think of one scene in particular where you really added to something that wasn't in the script, and that was in the Go Firm house where all the guys are hanging out, and Riley is talking to them and kind of interviewing them in a way, and becoming aware of who Hicks is. And Hicks and Riley are really kind of almost the opposites of one another, and yet you tied it into that they actually had some similarities, and that you were doing your job and he was doing his job.
Yeah, no, I love that, and I love working with Greg. You know, Greg who played that character, and he the Hicks. Yeah, and it's exactly what it was. It was like the idea of you see these two people that come in, like, oh yeah, here comes this maybe possibly liberal, over the top, lying reporter trying to make a story. And then you have the more straightforward Marine that's really involved, and of course you're going, oh boy, these guys are going to be totally opposites. Yet by the end of the movie, you start to realize that they do have this common connection to the same scenario. And
I think that's something that you really added, and you were able to bring alive by adding just a slight change in the dialogue, and that was just such a blessing to have you do that. I think it was also wonderful having someone who is a director on the set. Lindsay, did you want to speak to that, or?
Well, the conversation really has been so upbeat so far. I'm almost afraid to ask the questions that I wanted to ask. But, I'd like, if I could, to Michael, as a realist painter and an artist in the early 2000s, I found that those few years to be very difficult for me creatively, knowing some of the things that were going on in the world. And I'm just wondering if you might be able to reflect on some of your experiences during that time when our country was in Iraq, and how it may have affected your creative process or anything of that nature that you may recall about that time.
Well, to be honest with you, it's like, that is such a big, I mean, we know that, like, there's several things that have sort of followed humanity through all of history, and war is probably, maybe if not number one, at least in the top three, on a macro scale, of course. And I think we've got so many sort of weird relationships with combat that there's no way it cannot affect you unless you're just trying to tune it out. And so for me, when I was watching that whole thing take place, I remember thinking that, from the cheap seats, you can sit here and go, Bush or whoever it is, you should go do this, you shouldn't go do that. But I knew for a fact that if I had placed myself or anybody that I was sitting next to having a discussion about this in that position of having to make these choices, that I don't know, it takes a special person to be able to walk that through and make those calls and do those things. And I know sometimes we like to stereotype the images. If somebody goes to war, we like to stereotype them as these guys are going, yeah, let's go to war. What do you think? We can make some money, guys. What do you think? I mean, we take it to that degree, or the opposite. It's like if somebody doesn't, we're like, oh yeah, it's that the weed smoking liberal, or you know what I mean. So we sometimes tend to go to these directions. And I was really remember that time trying to tap into how intense and how I mean, it's when you're making calls or being involved in things that lives are on the line. Lives of innocents, sometimes lives of the guilty. But I mean, it's changing history for everybody. And it's almost overwhelming. You can't really sit here and say I've got a clean idea on the whole thing, because you don't. But that's what I mean is it's that time, and even what's going on right now, and that's why I think Devil Dogs is fairly timely, because you got this whole thing with ISIS going on, and people trying to juggle how do we go out and fight this, or do we fight this, and what should be our involvement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, and it affects my work. My work is not. Because I do pay attention to that stuff, and I always have. And I actually, I like to read about past conflicts. I like to read about Vietnam. I like to read about World War II. I'm not from the point of it's fun to read about these terrible moments. But the reason I like to read about it is because as they say, what's our big mistake is not learning from history, and I'm trying to pay more attention to that and be more aware of the things that sometimes you only learn in hindsight.
Yeah, one of the things that has happened, obviously, in the past 6 to 8 months, even you could say the past year, with the advent of ISIS coming into power there in that part of the world is that there's a lot of stories coming up now that reflect back to that period of time. For example, just yesterday there was a front page story in the New York Times titled "The Secret Casualties of Iraq's Abandoned Chemical Weapons." Major story. Obviously, a tremendous amount of time and research went into this on behalf of the staff of the New York Times to reveal some very interesting details about something that maybe we didn't know already, as if anything more could be known. And we find, as directors and producers of Devil Dogs, and I'm sure you probably realize this as one of our actors, that there's so much material that is coming up related to that period of time, and we're really trying to be cautious and careful, as you pointed out a moment ago, not to have any particular agenda and really to try to focus on the stories of the individuals. And we feel that alone offers so much opportunity, and particularly with Riley's character being so different from all the other Marines that he's with in the film, it's as if Riley is, as you pointed out, the voice of the people back home, or the eyes of the people back home. And I'm just wondering, when you were on the set, and we had some Marine consultants there, and one of them came up to me at one moment when we were filming, and he didn't have tears in his eyes, but he was clearly on the edge, and he said, what you guys just filmed there actually, and he held up his arm, he goes, the hairs on my arm are standing up. That really brought it home to me. Did you have any sense of that when we were there working?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of reasons, and it's kind of interesting because one of the things I chose not to do with this particular project was, after initially reading the script the first time months before when it was in its preliminary state, I chose not to read any of the stuff prior to when I entered the scene after that, because I felt like the idea is I should come in not really knowing what these guys are going through or where they're at. And that would be true of the character. I wouldn't know what these guys had just gone through, or what their feelings are, or where they're at that place. So I wanted to come in with a slightly more objective idea, or maybe innocent almost idea of what was going on there, so that by the end of it, and that I could allow myself to feel maybe what I wasn't anticipating or expecting. I think I know what you were talking about. I think it's a sequence. It's one of the scenes towards the end of the project, I think, is what you meant. Is that right? That was like one of the last scenes in your film there?
I don't remember exactly which scene it was. I'm talking about Cody Gear, who is a real Marine, or was, and one of our consultants.
He's a U.S. Marine veteran.
Yeah, a veteran of some substance, and he had some things very interesting to tell us, and so it just seems that there's these layers and layers of depth in these individual stories that offers the opportunity for Devil Dogs to be perhaps a different kind of war movie. And I'm not saying that others haven't covered this material, but it's what we feel that we can go into, given the opportunity to move further with it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I did, and then plus, you were shooting on that incredible set, and it was like it wasn't hard to just be there and sort of feel that place, or get at least an idea of what it must feel like to be there. And I mean, there were a few times there where I definitely tapped into this idea of something being so lively 1 second and then being completely gone the next. And and there's no doubt, and I'm sure this happens with a lot of people as they get older, is that there is this more ongoing awareness of the finiteness of life, and sometimes you feel like, wow, it was cut short prematurely, and there are other times where you feel like somebody lived a nice, long, fruitful life, but either way, you realize it comes and it goes. It comes and it goes, and it comes and goes. Even people with the longest lives, hundreds of years ago, they've been, it's gone. It's done. So it's like, what do we do with this time here? And And again, you've got these soldiers that go out there, and it's not like they're 70-year-olds. I mean, they're 18. They're like at that 18. I mean, I'm not to I don't want to paint the wrong picture. I mean, some of them are much older, but I'm just saying that you can get them as young as 18 that are going out there and sometimes not coming back, or coming back less physically than, or even sometimes mentally than they were when they went out there. And though I understand it, I don't necessarily sit here. I mean, it's terrible. I mean, we all would love to have, to some degree, at least enough of a utopian world where maybe war doesn't exist. Okay, maybe we got fist fights still and we get robberies, and it would be nice to take out the mass sort of erosion of humanity, with wars. But because you got to kind of look at it as, well, I mean, at least the way I do is I don't know if we're ever going to quite get there. At least probably not in my lifetime. So under those circumstances, now we're trying to balance out how do we make the war the most efficient and appropriate that we can. And it's like that kind of equation, that sort of idea of making it a mathematical sort of this plus this equals this, I don't think really exists. It's never going to satisfy everybody. It's never, and probably it's not even going to satisfy the people that are satisfied with what they're doing, So being there, being in touch with these guys, looking at the actors that were there playing your parts, I mean, it'd be easy to just take those guys and make those the real guys and see how, and that's the case. Those guys all had their clones that were over, over there, or in Vietnam or wherever, that were losing their lives, and even recently with the ISIS thing, with they would get these guys from the press and they're beheading these guys. I'm thinking it could have been me, So it was a very potent set to be on, and I'm very sort of interested to see where you guys end up taking it, because I think it has so much possibility. The way you were putting it together, again, I didn't feel like you were just kind of making it this sort of self-contained sort of message piece. I mean, it's a message piece, but it's more like it allows the audience to sort of just embrace what it is and get their own stuff out of it,
Yeah, well, that's pretty much the direction that we feel that we can continue in is a sort of transparency and openness that will allow for it to be kind of participatory in some sense, as we try to keep things on the set there. And certainly
right.
You were able to get into that mood quite a bit. The character of Riley, he represents to me the collective consciousness. He is a member of the press. He's a photojournalist. And he comes with an open mind, as you said, not to have any particular agenda, and just to look at things and see what he can see. And maybe he gets his fill of it. I think there's a lot of room for that character even to be expanded a little bit. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about, how you might approach that given the opportunity to do so.
Well, I think you and I talked a little bit about this when we were there, which was if in the hypothetical situation you were going to turn this into a feature, let's say, what I thought was really interesting is that if you did have these two characters, you had the Hicks character and you had the Riley character, and they're both kind of coming from opposite sides of the street, so to speak. And, you got the one guy who's in the military and he's ready gung-ho, he's experienced, he's seen death, he's ready to jump back into it again. Then you get the guy that's a little more like, he's obviously have experience, he's been bopping around units, he's seen some terrible stuff, but he's still sort of behind the camera the whole time. He's not behind a gun, he's behind the camera. And so you sort of have them being opposites in a way, to some degree. But as the story progresses, and you and I had discussed this, Hicks is losing his quote-unquote brothers in battle all the time. It's driving him to have that connection to the war. Yet we find that Riley actually had a brother that was over here fighting, and he lost him. And suddenly you start to realize at their core they both have that connection together, but it's only discovering it through battle that they sort of find how they approach the war together, And so I thought there was so much potent material there with that. I mean, it's one thing if you get a bunch of buddies and they're all like, let's go get the mission done. It's the Dirty Dozen, Magnificent Seven, whatever. They're all pretty much the same with, one might be a cigar smoker and the other might have a cooler hat. But, here you actually have two very different people in the same scenario, but at the core having the same, now that core of the brothers, quote unquote, could be a metaphor of just saying they both have hearts. But in the end, that's kind of what you were trying. I mean, we talked about maybe taking it that way, and I thought that would be a fun story to watch.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of potential. Another thing that I wanted to ask you, you showed up ready to play in a number of ways, and you had a definite uniform. You had a definite costume that you came with that I thought you did really well. And I just was curious if you had put a lot of thought into it, or did you just kind of grab a few things on the way out the door and said, well, this is Riley, It
was a little of both, because I did go online just to kind of make sure I wasn't, approaching it wrong, and just to see what some of the news correspondents look like. And I went through it, and I thought, because I thought to myself, I didn't want to just deck out in like military gear with a camera, because I thought the idea of this is that you get these two different perspectives, so there should be some sort of a visual differential between him and the other guys. So I looked, and I said, wow, some of these camera guys are just walking around in their shirts and their slacks or their jeans and their T-shirts, and, they've got maybe a vest on or sometimes a helmet. But I thought, all right, well, that's great, because it's not only does it separate him from the guys, but it also sort of makes him look more like he's back home. It keeps him civilian. And I thought that's sort of the other thing, is that he's sort of like we said, he's sort of the eyes of the world. He's the eyes of the audience. He's the eyes of the civilians. And so I did. I just kind of grabbed a couple, clothes that were my own clothes, and I just thought, I'd feel comfortable with this. I'd feel like this is me. And then all of a sudden I had that one shirt that surprisingly, it's got a guy with a camera and it says "Shoot to Kill" on the front of it. It's like some old vintage 1980s T-shirt. I don't even know where I got it from, and I thought it was so funny that I found it that day. I hadn't seen it in months, and I thought, oh man, I got to bring this in and see if they think it's too much. And then you saw it, and you were just like, oh, that's perfect. That shirt's staying on you. So it was great.
And what about the beads that were wrapped around your wrist? Oh
yeah, that was the other thing. I decided I was gonna. I had a couple of, and these things, I don't wear them all the time, but I found these pieces. One was a military band that said actually, you were doing the dealing with the Marines, but it said "Go Army" on it. So I thought, well, you know what, it's kind of like that's the military connection there. Then I had some Buddhist beads that were on. I said I'll put that on the other arm, because that sort of represents his more peaceful, maybe nature, at least comparatively, or his more sort of spiritual take on all of this. And I thought, trying to put a couple pieces on him that would sort of represent the different elements, that he represents.
Mm-hmm. Well, kudos for that. I mean, it was a great contribution, and it certainly shows up well on film.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, it looks great.
So,
Laura?
Yeah, so Michael, we felt so blessed to have you as Riley on Devil Dogs. I know that you had just wrapped directing a movie before you came onto Devil Dogs, and then as soon as Devil Dogs ended, I think you're in pre-production on your next one. So tell us about those projects.
I just had wrapped directing a film called Broken Memories. It's a feature film with Ivan Sergey and Rance Howard, who's Ron Howard's father, and it deals with a man whose father is suffering from dementia, and he's trying to keep him home, but his father keeps wandering off in his forgetfulness and doing crazy things, and so they're just about ready to take him to a home, which the son absolutely does not want to do, at least on the surface, because his father had to do that with his father and basically promised his son, don't ever send me to a home no matter what happens to me. So that's at least on the surface. So he ends up hiring a woman to come help him with his father on his farm. And, of course, this beautiful woman shows up, and the son starts to fall in love with her. But as it turns out, the father thinks that this woman is his dead ex-wife, and so the two of them are re-experiencing love in their life through the same woman in this scenario. And it was great. It's a nice piece. It was written by a woman named Frankie Lauderdale, a first-time writer, lives in Oklahoma. She's this woman in her 60s, and she just took a piece out of her own life and made this beautiful story that we picked up, and I made a modicum of changes to it, and basically to suit us being able to film it. But because it was originally set in Oklahoma and had some slightly different things we had to adjust with our budgets and stuff. But it just I'm really excited about it. We're just starting the editing next week, so and then I have another smaller film that I'm shooting starting in Thailand at the end of November. It's called The Journeyman. At least that's what it's called right now. And it's sort of I guess I can compare it to, it's a mixed martial arts version of The Wrestler. And
is this something
so really
you also wrote, or you're directing? And
I'm directing and acting it, and I'm writing it. And one of the things that I've, over the last 4 or 5 years, I started doing kind of along the lines of this creative talk is, so many of these movies are, it costs, it's like you have to spend basically the amount of money to buy a house to get movies made. And I just said, I remember doing an episode of Desperate Housewives one time, and they were shooting a scene with Terry Hatcher and Marsha Cross, and they were sitting at a table on the sound stage, and it was just the two of them talking. And I remember there was like 45 people behind the camera just standing there watching as they were shooting this. And I'm thinking to myself, this scene is probably costing them $1 million to shoot. And I go, and when you watch it, you're just going to see two people sitting on a table. I said, why can't I just do that with 3 people behind the camera and do the same scene and spend $150? So I started doing a lot of research and reading and searching technology and thinking about how stories can be minimized. And then I noticed Ed Burns was going out and shooting films for $10,000, $15,000 a piece, like the Newlyweds. I think it was called Newlyweds, and he did one called Nice Guy Johnny. And I said, that's it. I'm going to go do it. So I started doing these really small indie films, like Bring Me the Head of Lance Henriksen, like Seeking Dolly Parton, Enchanting the Mortals. These are all these films I'm trying to do that are more focused on creativity, more focused on relationships, more focused on risk-taking, really. But we're doing for a lot less money. And but I'm using everybody that's involved. They're all very well-experienced, either crew or actors. It's not like a bunch of kids jumping out of high school and going, let's go make a movie, we don't know what we're doing. I'm getting people to come on board that have been working in the business for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, but we're just doing it differently than most people. And they're all coming out great. I'm so excited about them. And so it's kind of nice. I've done a couple films now, with Devil Dogs and Broken Memories, and a couple others where you're going out and working with some serious equipment, some serious money, and trying to make everything look perfect. And now I get to go back and do a little imperfection creativity and make something fun again.
Yeah, I think maybe we can take a little bit of that and apply that toward Devil Dogs and do things a little less expensively. But it's certainly not an inexpensive genre to be doing.
Of course.
War. There's costumes and there's time period and all of that. So, yeah, maybe the next one's a relationship pick. We'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your insights.
You're very welcome.
And for sharing your stories and your experiences. Is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with?
Well, just, if you're listening to this because you want to go out and make films, I say go out and make them. You know what I mean? It's go out. A lot of people, I think, sometimes wait to hopefully have just that one Quentin Tarantino out-of-the-box Reservoir Dogs becomes an instant classic, so you're waiting for perfection. And I tell you, you're better off going out and failing 10 times and then finally making that one movie, because in the end, you're going to be learning as you go. You're going to be making an output as you go. I think it's more impressive to say, I got 10 movies done. Yeah, they're not all the greatest movies in the world, but they're finished. Then going, well, no, I haven't actually made anything yet, but I swear it'll be great when I do. So it's better off to just go off, make your movies or write your scripts. Don't stop yourself thinking, it just can't be done. Because one thing that scares me is being that guy that goes, I always wanted to write a script about this, and it's 30, 40 years later and you're still saying it. So I guess my advice would be, the thing in this business, having been here, like I said, since out of high school, I've been here a while, but I just started really young, is that I see the people, really the failures, and I'm just using that term just because it's making my point, from this business are those that just gave up. It's not the people that come in and don't do a good job, it's the people that give up. So if it's in your blood, go do it. If you feel like you could do something else, then that's a good sign to go do something else. But if you realize this has got to be your life, then just go out and do it and don't stop. That's what I got to say.
Hoorah!
Hoorah!
Hoorah! Right on. Thanks so much, Michael.
All right, you guys.
Thanks,
have a great one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.